This is the walkthrough video for PCTC 2021, round 2, question 2, Sweet Shop Softie. So here we need to input a number, and we need to figure out what we need to add to this number to bring it to the next multiple of 50. So first off, let's do our input, and because this is a decimal number, we need to make sure we input it as a float, as opposed to an integer. And now the next thing I'm going to do is the actual maths bit, which is, in this case, I'm going to get the remainder from number when it's divided by 50. So let's do number modulo 50, and let's take the remainder from that. And what this does, for example, in this is the example input 1 is it gets 43.2. Example input 2, it gets 37.0. So it just takes off the remainder when you divide this number by 50. And the reason I'm doing that is because now, to get the final answer, all I need to do is to do 50 minus remainder. And then I can print that off. And that's going to be our final answer. And so by doing it this way, we essentially don't need to have to bother calculating, are we 3 times 50 plus a certain number? Are we 5 times 50 plus a certain number? We don't really bother what our actual number is. We only care what the difference between our number and the next multiple of 50 is. But you see in this case, we actually only got 2 out of 10. And this brings me on to quite an interesting an issue with Python, which is that when you're dealing with floating point numbers or decimal numbers, then Python can't deal with that very well. So for example, if I am to run the first example input with our current code, the output is not 6.8 like it should be. It's 6.8 with a load of zeros and a few ones at the end. And the reason that this happens is because when computers, especially when Python does maths with decimal numbers, it's not perfectly precise. There's always going to be a tiny amount of error. And in this case, the error is like 1/zillionth or whatever. But that error still exists, and therefore it shows up in our code. And that's just true with every computer and every programming language. But it's especially true in Python because it's quite annoying, because it does it automatically, even when we clearly don't want it to happen. And so what we need to do in this case is we can either just print it off to only one decimal place, which will of course be accurate. But what we can do instead is we can take a number and convert it to an integer. But if you convert it to an integer, we lose the information in the decimal point in the tens column. And so what we can do first is we can do num is equal to num times 10. So we multiply itself by 10, which means we save the data from the decimal point. And at this point, our number is now actually just going to be an integer, right? It's going to be a whole number. Therefore, we can convert it to an integer in Python. Then we can do the rest of our maths. But remembering in this case, because we've multiplied our number by 10, we also need to multiply 50 by 10. And also down here, we need to multiply 50 by 10. And then finally, we should also print that off as a float, because we need to, actually no, we don't need to do that. We need to divide that back by 10. And that should work. So if I run the code, we should now see 6.8 be output. Yeah. And so now I can submit the code and hopefully we get 10 out of 10. And yeah, just to summarize what we did again there is we converted num into an integer, and to make sure we don't lose any information, we multiplied num by 10. And because we multiplied num by 10, we also had to multiply all of our maths numbers by 10. So we got 500 there and 500 there. And then finally, to print off our actual answer, we just divided our answer by 10 because we multiplied it by 10 at the start, and so we need to undo that at the end. And that gets us 10 out of 10.